Okay, here we go. Amazing. A microphone is a handy thing. Thanks so much for coming, everyone. This session is Tools to Keep the World Connected, the Role of Soft Power. I am Mary Eintema. I'm a member of the World Affairs Councils of America board and also President Emerita of World Boston. So have had the great fortune to work with our moderator, Catherine Brown, for years now. This discussion connects directly to our conference's overarching theme, the world on balance, by examining how diplomacy, development, democratic values, and cultural exchange serve as stabilizing tools in a moment of global uncertainty. And I want to ad lib, because it's not here, but I think many of us also fervently believe, actually know, that soft power is also a critical instrument in the national security toolkit of any country that's paying attention. So, for all those reasons, this is the right session to be at. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Catherine Brown, President and CEO of Global Ties US.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mary. And yes, this is the room to be in, so thank you for choosing it. And I'm honored to be here. As Mary just said, this is a session on how we're blending soft and hard power to maintain global connection, which is what we need for our alliances and for our economic security. And how are our tools, are our tools moving fast enough? Are we keeping up? What is the state of them right now? So I just wanted to start off by saying that I teach a soft power and national security course at Georgetown every year. And I always start with this very basic rounding premise with my students, which is that soft power is really the ability to attract versus to coerce. And, which is hard power, right, is coercion. And it's shaping others' preferences through tools like culture and exchanges. But it's also about, credibility. It's about a country's values, institutions, and whether or not a person or a people or a place see that as being legitimate. And what is deemed to be attractive really to one audience can really repel another. So it's really important that we think about that what we think might automatically be soft power or attraction just may not be, depending on who you're talking to. So we need a very large toolkit to successfully get the outcomes that we want, that our country needs, in various bilateral, regional, and multilateral situations. So that's why I'm so thrilled today to be moderating this panel, because we have three experts in talking about diplomacy, military, and democracy assistance, and the different tools that we have at our disposal. So first, we have Ambassador Brian Nichols, the former Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs and Ambassador to Peru and Zimbabwe. So welcome. We have Jack Stein. Am I saying your last name correctly? Wonderful. A defense strategist, consultant, and a former senior U.S. Air Force leader. And we have Brian Joseph, the Executive Vice President for Programs and Impact at the National Endowment for Democracy. So I'm going to start off with one question for all of them to kind of lay out what these tools are. And then we'll get into other specific questions. And then we're hoping to have 20 minutes of Q&A from the audience. So to kick us off, the first question, we'll go down the line, is which instruments of American statecraft, diplomatic, military, economic, educational, or cultural, remain the most essential for global connectivity? We'll start with you, Ambassador.
All of the above. So I think of soft power in terms of the Jedi mind trick. I want other audiences, other societies, other countries to innately believe that their interests are aligned with the United States. And I think the way to do that is to support their goals, the commonalities that we have. There are many ways to do that, and just note a few that I think are really important across our nation and from all the World Affairs Councils that you all represent. Engagement from state and local leaders as assistant secretary for the Western Hemisphere. We had the Cities Summit of the Americas in Denver, Colorado, and we had state and local level officials, local civil society organizations, local educational institutions engaging their partners throughout the Americas in a way that really brought home the people-to-people connections. I've seen similarly the incredible power that our health diplomacy has around the world, and that diplomacy is not just through CDC or USAID when that was active. It was among health professionals from local hospitals and universities, as well as major teaching hospitals and national clinics, and that engagement around health issues is very powerful. The private sector is an incredibly powerful way to link and influence, and one that resonates tremendously and has a reach that no central government can replicate. And then, our political engagement, whether through multilateral organizations or diplomatic communications, and talking about how we can achieve mutual goals is incredibly valuable in bringing countries to our viewpoint. And I'd say historically, the United States has been a strong supporter of democracy, human rights, the rule of law, free markets, and supporting individual human dignity. And I think those values resonate enormously with people and publics. I've served in countries where those things did not resonate with the leadership, and that was a source of friction, and I'm sure we'll be able to get into that going forward. I could discuss these issues for 6 days, so I'm going to stop there.
That's great. Thank you. Yes, Jack, go ahead. Same question.
All right. Hear me okay? Yeah, good. All right. So I'll start with power. Soft power to me is a little bit of an oxymoron to a degree. So in the course that I teach a course on military power and international politics. And first day, what I tell the students is power is actually the ability to change someone's behavior, change in a way that they would otherwise not have done if you're not applying the power, right? And so the idea then is that power, then even soft power, is something. To assume that something that you can exert then means it's no longer soft. So one way to look at it then, and the way I consider soft power, is to think of it as the attraction, right? The ideas, right? The role model. So if you look over the arc of U.S. grand strategy for maybe since World War II, maybe before that, that tension between, are we the model, are we the shining city on the hill, or are we the crusaders that are going to go out and change the world, right? Each of those have their time and place, and where to place that power and how to balance all those tools, the five variables, the 5 tools that you mentioned there, how to balance those have got to change with the situation. So you need them all, and you need them all at different times, at different places. As the military, in my experience with the military, I find that because of the threat that military necessarily represents, right, to whomever, to our friends and to our adversaries, you require trust. And so now, if we talk about soft power, from that perspective, soft power then becomes, is it power that is coercion, or is it power that's community, right? And so if you're in a world community and you carry a large hammer, right, you want to make sure that those that you're interfacing with, whether they're friends or adversaries, those that you're coming to ask favors from or to offer help to, understand that hammer's only there for the purpose at hand, right? It's not for something that I need for myself. It could be something I can use to help you build something, right? And that's where the trust comes in, the soft power comes in. And that soft power in the military comes from relationships. We could talk later about all the tools that we use within the military, certainly within the U.S. military right now, to continue to foster those relationships and that soft power amongst other militaries in the world. But we put a great amount of effort into doing just that, so that when the time comes, if we need to do something to actually do, whether it's a tsunami relief or it's actual fending off an adversary together as an alliance, we're able to work together, and most importantly, we're sure that when we pick up the phone to call our counterparts, that they'll pick up the phone as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And Brian, I'll just repeat the question one more time. So which instruments of American statecraft remain most essential for global connectivity, especially in your line of work?
Yeah, I don't want to punt on this one by agreeing and saying I agree with all of the above, but let me take it this way, which is, so I work at a foundation that's funded by the Congress to advance democracy and human rights around the world. And a few things I would just note. One, and I think this is a wonderful gathering of people, and the idea that sort of citizens across the United States representing really diverse interests, perspectives, self-interest are engaged in this work is sort of the strength of the United States and its value proposition around the world. And when I think about them in diplomacy, defense, aid, democratization, they all intersect. And I really have a hard time understanding where one of the concepts ends and the other begins. But one thing I would sort of suggest is, for the United States, there are very few countries that are of significance to the United States. So China, Russia, perhaps Venezuela today, Iran. You can count on one hand the number of countries where their behavior is consequential to the United States in an immediate way. For the rest of the world, the United States is consequential. So there's a power imbalance. So everywhere you go around the world, the United States might not be their principal country of concern. It might not be the principal trade partner. It might not be the principal adversary. It might not be the principal country of migration. But we're always number 2, 3, or 4. Everywhere in the world, the United States matters. And I think that's why I think these types of conferences are so important in bringing everybody together. We have a diverse citizenry. We have people from all over the world that influence our politics. Our trade influences, our diplomacy, our military is consequential everywhere. And I think for Americans, we often forget how important we are to other countries. And I think that's one of my starting places why I think all of the above matter. So the retreating into our sort of an isolationist or sort of a perspective that sees the United States as a central node and like takes us out as a central player in the world, I think is detrimental to American interests. And for me, American interests are really broad. I do not define them narrowly as security. I think we have a security role. I think we have an economic role. But I also think as the United States, warts and all, has a role to play in help upholding human dignity and freedom around the world. And I think these things, when done well, all play into each other. And I'll just give you one example and stop there. If you look at what's happening in Venezuela now, Venezuela is a country that is sort of clearly of hard interest to the United States. Drugs, crime, national security issues, however you define them. But it also intersects with democratization, Maria Corina Machado and a Nobel Peace Laureate, the biggest amassing of sort of military power in the Caribbean in a long time. And the ability for us to succeed in our policies in Venezuela, in the Caribbean, in Latin America, will depend on the intersection of good diplomacy, good military strategy, and a focus on what happens next, whether or not the U.S. engages military on the democratization front, because what leaves the U.S. interest served in Venezuela, it's a strong, secure government with a degree of legitimacy. And I think to get to that point really does require, again, to sort of go back to your first question, the U.S. to see it in a holistic manner, because at any one given moment, perhaps today it's military, perhaps tomorrow it's diplomacy, in 2 or 3 years, it might be cultural exchange where we have a lot of buy-in and goodwill with Venezuelans who are trying to rebuild their country.
That's great. It's like you queued that up for Ambassador Nichols, because as the former Assistant Secretary for the Western Hemisphere Affairs region, wanted to expand on a point you made about in your ambassadorial career, that friction with leaders, maybe not so much with people, and to kind of build off of what Brian was just saying. What have you learned really about soft power tools in like hard environments, and that getting that mix right to connect with people that you can have influence with?
Thanks. It is a real complicated challenge to do so, particularly when you're advocating for classical values that certainly we've historically held dear. As ambassador in Zimbabwe, there was a moment where it appeared there was going to be a democratic opening in Zimbabwe following the exile or the withdrawal from power of Robert Mugabe and an election there. And we pressed hard for democratic changes. Unfortunately, it became clear that the ruling party was not interested in a change broadly. So those efforts had limited impact, though we did support election observation, civil society organizations, respect for human rights, and getting the balance right. I think what we did deeply endeared us to the people of Zimbabwe, and walking down the streets or in the supermarket or the hardware store when I was there, people were always extremely grateful for the work that the United States did. And one time I thought I was going to get stabbed in a hardware store when this guy came up, but he just wanted to hug me. and thanked me for all the help that the United States had done. You look at the use of soft power by China in the same environment. They never told the Zimbabwean government what to do, per se, but they did provide them with a new parliament building, a new airport in Harare and Victoria Falls. They built roads. They got important mining concessions out of the government, and they gave the vice president 6.5 months of life-saving critical care treatment when he got some unrevealed disease, and I thought he was dead, and they took him to Beijing, and 6 months later he came bounding down the stairs of a Chinese jet on the tarmac in Harare. I was like, wow, they brought him back from the dead. How did they do that? So I think a key dynamic in soft power is whether or not you are addressing the audience of the public, the people in a society, or whether you're addressing leadership. In some societies that are more democratic, there's a continuity between the people and government. In other less democratic or undemocratic societies, what leadership wants can be completely divorced from what the people want. And even in some democratic societies, the horizon timeline is that of an election. So a long-term development program or a long-term food assistance program does not resonate with leaders who just want a new national stadium in time to host Cricket World Cup in their country or whatever big sporting event, or a new airport that they can put their name on. I would just leave you with the thought that I think as we go forward as a nation, calibrating how we deliver assistance so that we are able to respond more quickly to leader level desires that we may find less merit worthy is going to be something we have to add to our toolkit, because our number one global competitor focuses the vast majority of their efforts on satisfying leader level demands, and they have what the public expresses as their desires is of little interest to them as long as the leader level is captured.
That's fascinating. And I want to come back to something you said, Jack, too, about the importance that the military realizes the importance of relationship building, right? The Chinese understand the importance of relationship building with the leader level. Can you unpack that a little bit more? And what are the tools that the military uses to really build those relationships? Like, are they exchanges? Are they training academies? Like, what is it exactly?
Yeah, all the above. If you can imagine it, they do it. So let me give you a personal example. I went to War College in Montgomery, Alabama. So great catfish just up the road, and it's really muggy, right? So in my class, though, a few hundred folks, there were 50 international officers that participated from 50 different countries. And so, first of all, the format was seminar. So you developed a relationship. You stayed with your class or your seminar of about 12 throughout the year. So you developed close relationships with those individuals specifically. And then, of course, there's larger events with the entire class. For example, every year they do one American food event. So it's a Saturday afternoon in a hangar, in an aircraft hangar, and each of the seminars do an Americana type food event. So there was a football tailgate, area there. So cookouts and hamburgers, and then there was a Southern cuisine, and then there was a Northeastern cuisine type of thing, right? Well, about a month later, they do one on the international, 50 different countries represented, and it was phenomenal. But the opportunity there, the camaraderie, the fellowship that happens in that case, you develop not just sit down in uniform and have a conversation and get to know someone individually. Now the families are out. Now you're getting into culture, right? So that's just there in the U.S. The flip side of that is all those international students that were participating, that were there for a year in a small, very Americana, right, South, deep South, not big city, deep South city, are really learning what American culture is about, right? And so they had the opportunity not just to interface with their military, but they actually live on the economy, and they get to know the local area, and they experience the U.S. So there's your ideas, right? They're passing ideas. That's one example. We have schools like that throughout the military, at all levels, from the youngest to the oldest. We do exchanges, and of course, we do the same to other schools. We send our officers into foreign country schools as well. So that is the first part in establishing and understanding, cultural understanding. But in addition to that, then we're also doing we're also establishing personal relationships. So I did a quick scan this morning as I was coming in to figure out how many of senior officers around the world, senior military officers, specifically chiefs of staff. So think the senior Army officer, the senior Air Force, or the senior military officer actually attended a school in the U.S. And the number's not insignificant. We're talking dozens today, right? That's an opportunity for our senior leaders to pick up the phone, knowing that they're going to pick up the phone and have a serious conversation. Not that the substance of the conversation is going to be pleasant, not that they're going to agree, but the fact is they pick up the phone. And so that's how those relationships happen. And that perpetuates. Every exercise we do, every time I went to I stationed in Japan for a couple of years, every time we went to a Japanese base for a couple of weeks for an exercise, that was an opportunity to do the same social event. And they enjoy social events. The same social event with their officers and their families and get to know their culture the same on their economy and get to know their culture. So just that level of understanding, right, goes a long way into two things. One is in crisis, so whether it's a humanitarian event or an actual military crisis, now you've got a ready relationship that you can walk into, and it's easier to set up that interoperability. More importantly, I think, is that once you've set that relationship up, that interoperability up, they also have the trust up so that they know you'll be there, so that there's a sense of not just in crisis, but if there is a crisis, they know that the U.S. is still going to be shoulder to shoulder, right? And in the current environment, against our current pacing challenge, that's a problem for us. We don't know, it's difficult for us to project in the Pacific. We're going to need friends and allies in the Pacific to help us be there when we need to be there. They need to know that we're going to be there because they have to, if you will, pick sides. And I hate to say it that way, but they have to, transmit, telegraph, where they favor or where they stand. And in order to trust us that we'll be there, in order to do that, to favor or at least transmit signal to our pacing challenge that they want to be neutral, whoever it is wants to be neutral or wants to favor something that's a little more open, a little more in accordance with our international standards, they need to know that the U.S. will be there if they need us. And that's extremely important. And the only way to do that is build those personal relationships.
Yeah, I love how it's just essentially human this all is, right? It's building trust and connections that way. And of course, that's a lot of what we do at the State Department with public diplomacy and exchanges. So that's fantastic. Brian, I want to come to you and talk a little bit more about kind of private sector, like NGOs and like their work in sustaining these global connections. And so what responsibility do you think universities, nonprofits, businesses have? And what, if you can also talk about, like, what are you seeing with your grantees and what you're doing at NED right now in building these connections?
That's a good question. So I work at a foundation. It's a non-governmental organization funded by Congress. So it's a sort of a unique organization, which is basically the public expression of American interests done privately, recognizing that in the short term, American national security interests and diplomacy also often have different priorities where democracy and human rights is among them, but often not the priority. So the idea is really to pursue democracy and human rights over the long term, independent of sort of particular American foreign policy. And over the last 20 or 30 years, you've really seen around the world a proliferation of non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations engaged in a wide range of activities. So you're just looking around this room, I can imagine almost all of you are engaged in some form of civic or political engagement in the United States. It can be a PTA, it can be a local community service. Some of you might be doing international work. And so for us, when I think about it and the work we do around the world is we work with local organizations, with constituencies in their country, fighting over the politics that matter to them. And so when I think about this work, it's really understanding that democracy and human rights is deeply political. It's not a technocratic exercise. I've never met anyone who gets into politics who doesn't care about the outcomes. And for me, the goal is working with civil society organizations around the world is to recognize, A, that no country, no citizens have a singular interest. The four of us on this panel probably all agree on basic principles and would probably fight tooth and nail over certain policies. And that's true everywhere around the world. So one is I think civil society organizations and for Americans is really to engage broadly and diversely from different vantage points, recognizing that certain things are fair game for honest people who agree in basic concepts of freedom, human rights, and democracy to fight over. So one is really to try to engage and work broadly, and that's what I like about these exchange programs, the way you're describing the defense programs, is that American cities are America, rural America is America, conservative America, religious America, left-leaning San Francisco. These are all America. And the same thing holds true in almost every other country, that they're diverse constituencies. And I think building those bridges from different American perspectives, but also willing to engage with people around the world who also have diverse experience. And for me, civil society is just that. It's not the expression of a particular ideological vantage point, but it's the recognition that in democracies, different communities organize to pursue their interests short of going to war, and that's the political process. And so to me, the value of all of this stuff is to recognize the diversity of interest without sacrificing core democratic principles.
And we have time for one more question for me to ask the three of you, and I'm going to open up to audience Q&A. And we talked a little bit about, or Ambassador Nichols, you spoke about China and the example in Zimbabwe. And I was hopeful that all of you actually could answer this question about major world actors that are also using these tools to gain change behavior, to gain the outcomes that they want. And what are some examples of that, maybe kind of expand more in China or in other countries? And how can the U.S. counter that? And I'll start with you, Ambassador Nichols.
So I think in terms of global competition, China is at a level that no other nation is besides the United States in terms of their ability to use a huge toolkit. They have the Belt and Road Initiative is sort of the umbrella marketing for them, but they've got initiatives around law enforcement, the military, healthcare, commercial interests, that they are all pushing scientific exchanges, Confucius Institutes. They're active in every country that they have diplomatic relationships with. They have an embassy and an ambassador in every country that they have a diplomatic relationship with. They do not have a problem getting ambassadors confirmed. And if they need to make a change, they can swap out an ambassador quite quickly, whereas often for us, there'll be a year or more gap between confirmed ambassadors, which gives them an important advantage. They use their media and their educational system with increased deftness and agility, but they still do not match the United States in that area. I would note that other countries that are influential and effective, certainly the United Kingdom, through its international media arm, the BBC, is a very effective outlet. And the fact that our international broadcasting is effectively ceased means that we don't have a place where we can project native language but U.S.-focused coverage around the world. And when you're in a country where English is not the primary language, but you are interested in hearing the voice of America, that's not possible right now, which is a challenge. Certainly, France, with the International Organization of the Francophonie, is also a country that has historically been able to operate effectively across regions, though I would say that their engagement is more limited, particularly in non-French speaking countries. All of these tools that are used are important for countries to be able to influence events and to attract people to their worldview. To the extent that we give up those tools or set aside those tools, it means that we have less ability to impact world events and to bring people onto our side when there's a crisis and we need to call on them. I would note that the fact that we are no longer engaged in a significant way in health diplomacy, we're withdrawing from the World Health Organization, for example, means that our ability to collect information about the next pandemic is dramatically diminished. Conversely, China has stated that they're going to increase their health diplomacy and increase their engagement, and having China in control of that information the United States does not have. I think all of you could appreciate from the events of 5 years ago why that might be detrimental to the United States.
Thank you. Jack, what have you seen with other major world actors in this work?
I would say that, first of all, so we do it prolifically. You can see our partners do the same. Many of the NATO countries also engage internationally. We see this similar and mirrored with, in particular, adversaries. Russia and China are also engaged as well, but they do it much differently. And this is where we get the advantage, in my opinion. And in some ways, I think that they just maybe just don't get it. When we engage, and recently in the news, MBS was here, scored a deal for F-35s, right? For the U.S., that F-35 program, that's not about necessarily the equipment that they're going to have on the ramp, right? With that comes U.S. technical assistance, which means U.S. in the country and U.S. engagements. It means Saudis in our country working with the technical experts so they can learn. It comes with the pilots coming to our country to do the training. And it's done over a long period of time, decades. So Korea is a great example. Japan is a great example of where we've done that kind of investment in their military infrastructure and our presence there, in their military equipment that built a relationship over many, many, many decades. It's paying huge dividends today. We've done the same with Iraq. Iraq brought their pilots over to train, and we sent our technicians in there. That's happening today, and we hope that manifests over the long term. But I think what's important here is that the U.S. in particular, in contrast with how Russia and China does this, is we engage for the long term and we engage in depth. So we bring the entire package. We don't just give them a piece of equipment and say, best of luck to you, we're on the road, make sure you pay the bill at the end of the month, right?
Yeah, it's not as transactional. Yes, that's great. And Brian, for you, I mean, especially given the fact that you've worked in so many high threat environments and supporting activists, what are you seeing kind of impact of other major actors and powers?
Yeah, let me take that. So first, I do think we're living in a different time right now. Yeah. Just to put a pin in it, which is obviously history is a continuum. I think we're at a moment in history where all of these issues are coming to the front. They're systems competitor. China is a systems competitor. It's not just a strategic adversary. Economic system, political system. Russia is clearly trying to change borders in Europe and threaten the world that way. There are other regime types out there that threaten the United States. And so I just want to say I do think all of these issues are of particular importance at this moment in a way they have not been before, because the ideas that underpin these different systems are what's at stake. The countries that we see as adversaries have different ideas about fundamental political systems and rights systems. But I would just say one word on sort of the work I do is there are three things taking place in the world today. One is, just to be really clear, politics have become exceedingly dangerous and violent for a lot of people around the world who are looking to engage in political reform. There's the traditional authoritarian states that have high surveillance technologies who basically target anyone who threatens their hold on power. Traditional authoritarianism with high-tech skills, the ability to surveil populations at scale, makes it exceedingly difficult for people in high authoritarian environments to engage in politics. China is probably the single best example. You can read about the Uyghurs in East Turkestan, the Tibetans, people on the mainland. The ability to surveil and control their populations has never been even remotely as close to it is now. So one is we work in these environments. How do you work with people simply trying to express the most basic freedoms in environments where the state has the ability to control? The second is, in a lot of countries, you actually have non-state actors, terrorist organizations, gangs, whatever you would have, oligarchs, interests outside the state that are equally threatened by the ability for people to report, investigate, organize to advance their own interests. So that's a different environment. And the third, I would say, which is sadly increasingly true around the world, is states that do not have the capacity to protect their citizens. So if you're working and living in a failed or a fragile state, Haiti is a great example across the Sahel, how do you engage in politics where the state doesn't have the ability to protect your personal security? And so for us, we really look to a whole range of tools, tools that allow people to communicate securely, use high-tech tools to evade censorship in environments where non-state actors threaten them. How do they work with counterparts in different countries or in the United States or Western Europe to help take the information they've learned and put it back into it? But increasingly, in fewer and fewer countries, are politics a safe game for people to engage? And I think until you can really establish a degree of personal security, it makes it really difficult for people to influence the political outcomes until it emerges on the streets. And the last thing I'll say about that is, if you look around the world today, 2 or 3 years ago, you did not see this. You see it in Madagascar, you see it in Nepal, you see it in Sri Lanka, you see it in Bangladesh, that even in these highly authoritarian environments with high degrees of political violence, people continue to challenge regime consolidation of authority when it doesn't work in their interest. So in effect, politics are dynamic.
Well, we have 20 minutes for audience Q&A. And so I think there's a mic runner. Yeah, absolutely.
The room is small enough, but if you can speak into it for sake of our recording. Hi, my name is Sophia. I'm a student scholar, so it's so delightful to hear from all of you about your experience in international soft power. It's super exciting. I was really interested by y'all's conversation about like the China's new initiatives, like the Belt Road and the BRICS grants, and in contrast, our lack of foreign aid. Are you seeing new and creative ways that the United States is trying to exhibit or like get more soft power through maybe non-traditional means, sort of in contrast with our lack of money, maybe like working through corporations or anything like that?
So maybe I'll start just and note that the current administration is really focused on trade promotion, increasing the size of the Development Finance Corporation, working with governments and companies to promote bilateral investment deals. You've seen the use of tariffs as a way to promote those investments, principally towards the United States, but also to support American companies investing overseas, and that has been a big focus. They view the private sector investment and private sector-led growth as a principal way to promote the well-being of peoples around the world. The other area where this administration, I think, has been active has been the use of religiously based organizations in development. That's an area that they are looking to expand. And when religious-based organizations come to the administration and say they'd like to do something in a certain area, that typically is met with a warm reception, even if the checkbook does not immediately open.
Yeah, I would just say there are two things on the China front in particular. One is in Washington, it's probably been the single greatest shift in American analysis and understanding of China in relation to the United States. So if you went back 30 years ago, people did not see China as a threat in this way. So I think the analysis has shifted. Where I think the challenge is, I don't think what we do has shifted in regard to it. So the United States is perhaps on pace analytically, resources, programs, orientation of major systems to recognize the challenge that China faces, threat that China poses to American interests, security, trade, investment, everything is a slow on the uptake. And you can just look at BRI, you can look at their diplomatic engagement, you look at their training programs, you can look at how many people they bring to China to host and woo, like soft power, hard power. And the United States is really, my feeling is, analytically understands that China is the number one security threat, but across the range of tools at our disposal, the U.S. is not yet fully engaged in, I don't know what you call it, a whole of government understanding of how we take on a challenge of this proportion.
Just quickly, I would say, first of all, for the military side, I would say 15 years ago, we didn't understand the level of threat. Yeah. And I would just offer that, well, from my perspective, fortunately, the military hasn't seen that level of resources decrease in that way. If anything, the recent being 5 years towards China as our pacing challenge has shifted attention towards developing more of those soft power relationships in the Pacific in particular.
This has been a fascinating panel, and it's on a topic really near and dear to my heart and one I think about all the time. And I have so many fresh insights from hearing you, so thank you. It's really been top flight. One of the things I hear is China's weakness is it is transactional and thinks in a short-term time frame. And the success, when we think, Jack, in these longer-term relationships that 10 years from now we're going to need it. And Ambassador Nichols, you highlighted that too. And then, Brian, you just pointed out we've made the analytic shift that that's how we need to operate, but we haven't operationalized it. So, Ambassador Nichols, you've run a geographic bureau. It's been my experience reporting to one as an ambassador that there's a whole lot of emphasis on what we can do this year and next, but a lot less on building long-term relationships that leave a well of goodwill for my successor 3 times removed. What could we do at the Assistant Secretary Geographic Bureau leadership level to really reward that long-term investment?
Well, Ambassador Stevenson, a very challenging question, and quite perceptive. So I'd say maybe there's a few things that we can do to promote that longer term thinking. One is in our specific guidance to chiefs of mission, tell them that they will be evaluated on the basis of what is the legacy that they leave, not just what happened in the rating period for their evaluation, but how did they leave things for their successor, and there's generations to follow. The other area that I think is important, leveraging the breadth of the types of soft power that we're talking about in this room, and making sure that we're making long-term plans on how do we use that. And we do that in some areas. Things like our educational exchanges ranging from the high school level all the way to postdoctorals and Fulbrights and Eisenhower and Humphrey fellowships and things like that. That is the civilian side of the stuff that Jack was talking about, and I think that can be very powerful over the longer term. And then on the economic side, we haven't really talked about China's investment in infrastructure, mining, energy around the world that has been very much transformational for them. And to the extent that we can promote these long-term investments that have a relationship that lasts 10, 20, 30 years, I think that sets things up for a long-term relationship with society.
Yes, there in the back corner.
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm with World Boston. I'm a high school teacher. My question is, university systems in America is one of our greatest soft power, but the current policy of student visas, how much of a threat is that to our soft power? And do you see other countries kind of aggressively taking over that soft power?
So, great question. Patriots are 9-2. I'm very pleased with that. So I think it is a big challenge. Again, to echo Jack, the educational opportunities that we provide around the world are things that give us an entry point. And just as chiefs of staff in militaries around the world can often trace their education back to the United States, cabinet ministers and leaders, certainly in Latin America and the Caribbean, I would say more of them than not have studied in the United States during my career, at least at some point. And they understand us. They might not agree with us all the time, but they understand us and they know how to both literally and figuratively speak our language. When we make it harder for countries to send their people to the United States to study, that takes away that toolkit. And there is a risk, but for example, we have thousands and thousands of Chinese students studying in the United States. They are bringing skills that China uses to its benefit. But it also gives those people an insight into our nation and maybe opens their perspective. And we lose that when we are not providing visas to people in countries. And I'm very passionate about this issue. I could go on and on. But one thing I would note in Zimbabwe, a country that, about 12 million to 17 million people haven't had a census in 20 years, so we don't know. But they're sending incredibly bright and talented students to the United States to study, some of them from very poor backgrounds. Literally, kids who are garbage pickers in dumps get scholarships, go to the United States, and become world-class leaders in whatever field that they pursue, and they become people who are committed to sharing the values that they learned in the United States. So it's a huge sacrifice, and one that we need to fight to restore that ability to study in the United States.
Can I add to that just briefly? My next door neighbor is a Jordanian gentleman, retired now. He came here as a PhD student and stayed. And so it's not just about what we're projecting in our soft power, but it's also what we're bringing into the country in terms of awareness and bringing culture into our country for the understanding. So the benefits multi-layer.
The follow-up, what I had also asked is, do you see any other country threatening to take over our soft power? Like, I have a 16-year-old, and I know some English universities are offering free tuition to American citizens. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would very briefly. I don't think we can take it for granted that the United States will be the first choice for many people around the world. I think we're living in la la land if we don't think we have to actively position the United States as a place receptive to, welcoming, and mutually beneficial of these educational things. You're starting to see anecdotes of it. I think a lot of us teach university classes. The number of foreign students on our campus are fewer. Where are they going? I mean, it's still hard to get all of the evidence. More and more of the English language countries, Britain, the UK, New Zealand, are beginning homes to them. You see more and more people going to programs in Thailand and other countries. So I do think the U.S. higher educational system has been the best university system in the world that people have been drawn to. I don't think we can take it for granted that that will continue, because there are other people who are seeking to take advantage of this opportunity.
James O'Mara, Texas A&M International University, so the U.S. university system, and also World Affairs Council, the RADO. The topic of soft power capacity development, especially through diplomacy, military, and economic, I'm not sure whether that's the accurate title for you, but how does each sector approach building understanding of self, us, and other as a strategy for capacity development?
Let's see if I'll start off. Yeah, well, give it a try. Understanding self. I think understanding self, at least on the military side, understanding self, I think, is not a problem, right? It's the institutionalization of the individual when they start in basic training. It starts from the very beginning, and their tradition, the identity, all comes up. The difficulty is then doing that in the context of now the other, right? And so, how do you learn the other? There are a lot of programs, and I think. We've done this for decades, at least my experience in the military, since I'm 30 years in the military. Numerous programs start and then end to try and do this, right? More language programs, more cultural exposure programs, the exchange programs, a lot of the exercises meant to do that. The problem there is, I think on the military side, is the rotation. In the military, we do 2, maybe if you do 3 years as an assignment, it's a constant rotation. And so you go in, you get exposed, and you're out. Now, that's a benefit because it spreads it out to a degree, but it also loses that long-term relationship and then long-term exposure. So it's a hard problem for the military, and certainly the military's focus is, first and foremost, has to more of the hammer and nail concept than the soft power. And so I think that's a challenge that's going to exist, or potentially going to exist for the foreseeable future anyway, not for lack of trying, though.
Just quickly add that, from the United States diplomacy side, we're looking at sort of 3 ways that we're doing these things. One, we are screening for entry people who are smart, talented, know themselves, are able to adapt and deploy skills. They should be educated and continue to be developed over the course of their careers in both the us part. They need to understand the United States, what its goals are, what each administration wants out of them as a diplomat. And that's an evolving process and can change dramatically, as we have seen in recent times. And then the them part, as the educational process, both actively before you enter and then during your career, we have area studies programs, we have deep familiarizations, language training programs that allow people to develop those skills, often in concert with outside academic institutions. And then when you're overseas at a post, you are getting that depth of knowledge that hopefully you will come back to later in your career. My first assignment was a consular officer in Lima, Peru. 25 years later, I went back as ambassador, and being able to serve multiple times in a single country or in a region helps you bring that depth of understanding of the other.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Isabella. I'm another one of the student scholars here. I'm from World Affairs of Worcester. I was just wondering if U.S. soft power, or really soft power relations in any country, has been affected by the extremism itself, if other countries aren't taking soft power initiatives as seriously because of that, and just how we're seeing that around the world.
It's hard to draw conclusions at this point in time, to be frank. There's a lot of this which we are assuming things are going to break a certain way. What happens in the rhetoric and the policies actually often don't move at the same pace. But I do think what's happening is the United States is repositioning itself in the world in a whole range of consequential manners that the tail end of what this means we still don't really understand. And you just take, for example, USAID, the speed and the totality of removing AID as a tool in the toolkit is still playing out around the world. So you sort of have the assumptions we know what this will mean, that people will sort of say the U.S. cut and run, they left us this, we no longer have these tools. So I do think there will be a sort of a consequence to that. Personally, I do think once you sever relationships, it's hard to rebuild them because of trust, longevity, engagement. You can't just turn the switch back on. You lose the expertise, you lose the institutions that are central to this. But we really don't know the consequences yet. And I think the other piece I would say to it is the challenge is there was a lot about the sort of soft power tools of the United States that had become ossified over the years, or they had sort of developed in ways that were no longer as productive, as efficient, as targeted, as strategic as people would have thought. But instead of reform, you remove. And then by doing that, we're going to take years, if not decades, to rebuild the institutions, the expertise, the young people going through universities and grad schools who want to go into these professions so that we can once again project soft power around the world consistently. And I'll just say one word on China. For a few people have mentioned it, I actually don't think China is a short-term thinking nation. I actually, this has come up a few times. I think if you were sort of looking at it, China's engagement in the world is much longer term. Slow, steady, methodical investments that have proven durable over the years. So that is very different than a democratic state that pivots more frequently because of a change in administration. So one is, I think, China's engagement long term. And the last thing I would just say on that, on the comparisons with China, I would be very careful to equate what China does as the United States, even if the tools look exactly the same. Investment in media is not the same for a Chinese state that's looking to control a media environment than the United States that might be investing in an independent media. Civil society in an authoritarian state is not the same thing as civil society in a democratic state. So sometimes the tools or the outputs look exactly the same. An organization of citizens, a newspaper, a radio station, a training program. But you actually have to look very, very carefully at what these things are being used for to understand, are they actually sharp power? Are they soft power? What are they? Confucius Institute is probably the most obvious example of something that looks a lot like an American center, an American corner, but has a very different purpose and intent. But from the surface, they look the same. And I think all of those things we have to be paying attention to as the U.S. seeks to sort of reposition itself.
Great. Any quick additions to that as we wrap up?
I would just say that extremism can mean different things in places. I know from my perspective, extremism leads to a security problem, right? And so we can talk elsewhere if you like about what that means, but when you do risk assessments on whether or not you can stay engaged or whether or not your safety is more important, often the extremism just forces a withdrawal, right? And then, of course, you lose all of that. As Brian said, you lose all of that engagement, you lose all that culture, you have to build over again. And that's really, I think, the problem set. And oftentimes, at the extremists, that's the intent, right? And the problem then for us then in the soft power sense is to fight against that or determine ways to mitigate the risk but stay engaged.
Anything want to add?
No.
Okay. If I can just say one thing to all the student scholars in the room, I hope very much that you're taking in what we're talking about and hope that you'll be part of this work. We need to understand Gen Z, Gen Alpha around the world. There's youth bulges happening globally. And so we need your brains, we need your ideas, and we need your sense of kind of long-term thinking to build those relationships. So I hope you stick with it.
All right. Well, please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists, Ambassador Brian Nichols, Jack Sine, and Brian Joseph. And thank you to a great friend of many of us and of the World Affairs Councils of America, Catherine Brown. Thank you all for coming, because that's why we're all here, is because of each other. And very important lunch. Which is an important tool of soft power. And it will be at 12:30 in the gallery ballroom. And of course, we have a talk on trade in the balance, supply chains, and tariffs.